Then Saturday I was like, oh, this is what it must feel like to be divorced. There's nobody here in the house. It's pretty quiet. And then when your other mates have kids as well, you kind of feel like, oh, I'll call over to him, but then I'll just be sitting around his house while he's just gonna, you know. So it kind of made me just think, like, sometimes it's good to know what the worst case scenario is when you're fighting with your missus. Don't fight too much. Don't think it's important enough to win this argument, because when there's no one in the house, it's pretty boring.
Welcome to Ireland Unfiltered. This week's guest is Jerry Flannery. Jerry is, I think, one of Ireland's most fascinating sports people. The way he approached his career and the intensity he brought to it, and the single-mindedness is something that's always interested me. He is also a shareholder in Maximum Media, and so he's effectively my boss. And so there was no pressure at all when we had to sit down to talk to him. But he is genuinely really an interesting guy who's thought deeply about an awful lot of stuff, not just sport and rugby, but life as well. And talking to him about those things is always fascinating. He is going to be part of the House of Rugby for the new season, and we talked about that as well. But we talked about an awful lot more, including his departure from Munster. Before we go to that interview, don't forget to subscribe on all the usual channels. And if you like the show, please leave a review. Jerry, welcome to Ireland Unfiltered.
Thank you.
I want to ask you something. You said a while ago, you said, I never want to be a former professional rugby player. What are you now, would you say?
It's interesting. I'm not 100% sure. Up until May, June, I was able to say I was a professional rugby coach. Since I've stepped out now, I'm probably in a little bit of limbo. But I suppose starting from scratch when I had to coach, I kind of feel it's a familiar process again, where I'm starting in something else, where I'm going to try and come into Maximum Media and add value as a content creator. I suppose that's where I can add value straight away because of my experience as a rugby player and as a rugby coach. And after that, it's just trying to help develop the business. So
you're coming back. You are, like, you were in Maximum Media from the beginning. Like, you're a shareholder in Maximum Media, and you've been involved in that capacity since 2010, and now you're coming back on a kind of hands-on role.
Yeah. Well, it's a very different animal to when Niall and I first went at it. To be fair, I've been very much on the outside, particularly for the last 5 years with coaching, because it's very hard to the time constraints that coaching puts on you. It means that it's very hard to do anything else. So to come back in after this period of time and see how big it's gotten is really impressive. I just want to try and add some value to that.
And you're going to be on the House of Rugby. You're going to be doing stuff across Britain and Ireland.
Yeah. I suppose working across with Joe Media in the UK, but starting here, like, I suppose the lowest hanging fruit for me is to try and add on rugby on the content there. But I feel I have a little bit more of a responsibility as a shareholder there, that I want to try and learn the industry, learn a bit more about, like, there's so many people here who are so much better. Like, when we first started this, we were kind of trying to do 4 or 5 jobs each. Now everyone that's in here is top of their industry, and it's really interesting to come in and even just sitting down doing this process with you, seeing how much prep goes into it, and seeing how many people are behind the production of it and the level of production. I just want to get up to speed with all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And is that something you approach with the same sort of drive and single-mindedness as you approach everything in rugby?
I think rugby has shaped me from the point of view as I was never a very talented rugby player, but I was determined, and I had some luck during my career. But I think everyone has some luck. It's just being ready when the opportunity comes, and I had a great career. I loved it, and I kind of took the fact that without having a massive amount of talent and just being determined and putting in as much effort as I could all the time, I achieved a lot. And then that gives me the confidence to go into other areas where I probably feel like I don't have a huge amount of natural advantage going into it. And I don't know whether I'll be as fulfilled. I think I'll struggle to be as fulfilled at the end of the day from what I got playing for Munster Rugby and you know, in the latter years coaching at Munster Rugby. But I'll only know that after I've spent time away from it and see. But I can definitely take the work ethic that I had from rugby as a player and as a coach and try and apply it to other places.
And was there a difference in the fulfillment between playing and coaching as well? Was playing simpler?
Playing is definitely a lot simpler because from the point of view, everyone, you pick up a ball and you just play when you're 4 years of age, and you do that all the way up to when you're maybe 33, 34, 35 if you're lucky. Coaching is an awful lot more different because very few people when they're kids dream of being a coach.
Yeah.
And there's some people there who are probably more better suited to becoming coaches from probably either the positions they play. Guys who play in more strategic positions like a 10 or a 9 or a 15, they probably see the picture, the bigger picture stuff. So for me, I felt like it was a really steep learning curve for me as a coach. And the first 2 years when I came in with Munster were tough as well, results wise. So naturally, when you don't have a lot of experience in something, and I didn't feel I added an awful lot of value to start with, I found it really, really hard to develop any kind of real love for it. I was very much focused on the external stuff, like did Munster win at the weekend? You know, how are they getting on? Hoping that people would, that as a kind of a knock on them, I think that guy there, Flannery, is doing an okay job. His team is going well. But that's all so extrinsic, and it was only after I spent more time in it and I became more experienced and I felt I could add more that I started to love the coaching process from Monday to Friday, working with guys. And I was very lucky that, you know, professional rugby players in Ireland are really, and in Munster, the guys that I come across, they're really highly motivated and they're ambitious and they're hardworking. So it's a great environment to come in to work with someone who genuinely wants to get better. So they play on a Saturday, they come in, they sit down and say, I want to get better for next Saturday. And you work with them. And from Monday to Friday, by the time Friday comes around and that player is ready to play on Saturday, you've gotten enough out of it. You know, you feel like I've had my cake now. And if we win on Saturday, that's the cherry on the cake. And if we lose, you know, you make a plan then on the Sunday and you come back in and you're motivated again to go the following week. That's the kind of beauty of professional rugby. I didn't have that initially with coaching. I was so focused on if we won, it was a good week.
Yeah.
If we lost, it was a terrible week.
But it's surely like, you know, that's, you know, the reality of it is that whatever way your plans are working, you're also dealing with this external factor, which is, you know, pressure and the crowds and Munster, the expectations and things like that. So no matter how well the coaching is going intrinsically, you've always got to factor that into however you feel about the job.
It's true, yeah, and you'd be lying if you said you didn't feel when you've lost games that you don't feel, you know, pressure. But if you're trying your best as a coach from Monday to Friday, and you're trying to facilitate the players to put them in the best position that they can be in, and you're doing your analysis and you're trying to make it as simple as possible, because it's not for you, it's for the players. When they go out on Saturday, and it's not you don't do that, like you don't wash your hands of it on Saturday and say it's up to the players. You can still help there and assist and make big calls. So it's good to be fresh. It's really important to be fresh on a Saturday, but you've just got to trust your process, and you've got to trust that you worked hard during the week, and if it didn't work out, well, then you'll go and you'll try again next week. I think it's a lot easier to handle if the team loses at the weekend. If the team loses because, you know, you had a strategy that you put together, or you along with the other coaches put together, and you just got out coached. You say, well, look, we just got out coached, and we've got to come up with better plans. We've got to improve as coaches. It's going to happen as well that sometimes that one player in the team or a couple of players or an area may not perform as they should have, and you just have to take that and say, okay, well, look, that's going to happen as well sometimes. And you look at your processes during the week, said, did we spend enough time on that? Did I put enough focus on that? So it's definitely, the main thing is that you actually enjoy your job. If you enjoy your job, you can handle all the other stuff.
So listening to you there and hearing how you're talking about coaching and how you grew into it, like the obvious question is, why aren't you doing it anymore?
Uh,
Why aren't you at Munster?
yeah, well, I think I'm not doing it anymore currently because I stepped out of the job at Munster, and I stepped out quite late in the season. And it's a fantastic job coaching Munster, and I loved it, and it was a really good environment to work in. So it wasn't an easy decision to make, but just as things went on, I kind of felt like all good things come to an end, and my first 2 years at Munster, we didn't get out of our group in Europe, and then we got to the semi-finals for the last 3 years, and I think that we were achieving there. I think that it's never good enough to get to semi-finals, but I think what we had as a group to come from barely scraping into Europe, my second year, to consistently getting to semi-finals, I feel the team is within touching distance of winning now, which is kind of like that's a good place for a club to be. And it just didn't feel right for me to stay on with Munster, and it wasn't an easy decision, but I think that I think it's best that I step out for a year. I don't know how long, and I spoke to my partner and I said, listen, I may be miserable at the end of the year, but then at least I'll know that it's like that's like the coaching bug has me. But Munster are in a good place now, and they've signed really good coaches to replace me.
But what about the Munster bug? Like, is there a fear of leaving them? Because I saw when you retired, you said, when you tried from playing, you said, I'd be worried that maybe I'd be in the bar working away and some young hooker, some flash fella will come in. Munster might have lost 12 games in a trot, and he's earning a pile of cash and throwing 50s across the counter. Like, do you feel like, a keeper of the Munster flame in any way?
I feel like I owe the club everything that I've rugby has given me everything that I've had in life, in terms of like giving me afforded me a living when I played, and the same when I coach. So I don't feel like I'm a guardian of Munster rugby, but it is something that's been really sort of important, played a huge part in my life and in my family and all my friends. So it's natural for me that I want to see it in a good place, and I think it would be horrible to see the culture of a place, or to see the club become something that you no longer recognise, because it's been such an important part of your life. And when I said that about, I was almost like I had a football. I was worried that rugby could become like football, and players, but like the players that play for Munster now, they love playing. They dreamed of playing for Munster like I did when I was a kid. So,
but like it does, like when you say it was time for you to step away, and yet things are improving and the club is getting, you're getting closer, and you're creating the right conditions there for winning. It does still, you're still left wondering why you would do that now.
Yeah.
And why it wasn't right for you.
It just you get a gut feeling, and it just didn't feel right for me. And I have great time for the people in there, and there's, I suppose there's I could give you some reasons why I could step away. Is like coaching is very, very demanding, and it can be considered selfish at times, because your family and your kids have to sacrifice quite a lot. Now, in terms of for me, like if you look at Munster at the moment, like the coaches that are there, Johan van Graan has travelled all the way thousands of miles from South Africa. JP Ferrara has travelled from South Africa. Stephen Larkham's come all the way from Australia. Graham Rowntree over from England. So they're actually sacrificing a lot more in terms of having to uproot their families to come over here. Whereas I lived when I grew up, my family home was, I could run up to Thomond Park. Where I live in Limerick now is very close to the training centre. So we haven't had to sacrifice the same as other coaches, and that will be probably a test if after a couple of years or a year that I start to go, I really miss professional sport, I really miss coaching. There probably won't be an opportunity for me to go back into Munster, and then that would be the case there where I have to sit with my partner and say, would you be open to the idea of maybe going abroad, maybe going to England or going to France, and seeing and weighing that up then. But at the moment, I suppose I've been lucky enough that I could afford myself the opportunity to step out of the job at Munster. And if Munster can go on and win a European Cup next year and the following year, then I'll be delighted. I don't it's still the club I love. So
Ronan O'Gara said Munster have always been strongest when Munster people have been aboard the ship. Do you think that's true as important today?
I think it's it's not a necessity. I think it's helpful, and I think that the main thing is that people are mindful of what the culture of Munster rugby is, and they just that's not neglected, and I don't think that will be neglected. I think externally, I think some people say this is an easy shot that you can land on Munster, and if things don't go well, they'll just say, well, there's no Munster, there's no homegrown people there in the coaching group. But when we were losing and it was in all Munster coaching staff, people just say it's just been jobs for the boys, and that's why they're losing. And then you look up the road to Leinster and the way that they've progressed things, with Leo Cullen has done a fantastic job. He's brought in Stuart Lancaster, and maybe Leo got criticised at the start when they lost a few games, and now he's regularly up there as coach of the year. Winning the double last year, 2 years ago was phenomenal. Winning the league, and it's just getting the right people in there, people who are passionate, who work hard, because the values around Munster rugby are generally like that. People don't have to be the most talented, but they have to be very, very passionate, and they have to have a big work ethic. And I think that from the guys that I know that are in there, they have that.
Take me back then to running up to when you could run up to Thomond Park as a kid and growing up. Were you always single-minded? Were you always driven?
Yeah, I was. I suppose my dad is into rugby, so I think everyone kind of deep down wants to kind of impress their dad. And when I grew up, when I go into the bar when I was a kid, all my dad and all the regulars would be talking about the rugby from the weekend, and I'd see them talking about this player, that player, and how they kind of held him, the respect they had for them. And I kind of thought, well, this is a way to kind of win favour with people that I respect. So rugby was a vehicle for me to try and do that. Now, I didn't have a huge amount of talent, but I was lucky in that the way the game was at the time, that if you were determined enough and if you showed a bit of resilience and stuck in there, you'd get an opportunity, and that's probably the way it worked for me.
But before, we'll get into the career and all that, but just as a kid, you were an only child. Do you think that when you look back now, and you've 2 kids now and are very close together in age as well, but when you look back now, do you think that had a bearing on how single-minded you were, or how you were able to maybe block out external stuff? Because were you more kind of selfish or self-aware as an only child?
Selfish / self-aware.
Selfish / self-aware.
Yeah, it's hard because I've never been in a position where I've had a brother.
Yeah.
But when you're saying it like that, it was very much about what I wanted to achieve, and because I suppose there was nobody vying for my parents' attention to try and say, well, Luke here wants to go to hurling training. It was all about me going out to my rugby, and I suppose that afforded me that opportunity, and my parents facilitated me chasing rugby as hard as I could. So yeah, probably was selfish.
But you know what I mean? I'm also wondering, if even though you say there was nobody else vying for their attention, you're still trying to get, as you said there, your father's approval. And I'm wondering, and he had the bar in Limerick, and the rugby was the talk there. I'm wondering how much that was a factor in, motivating you too. Even if you are an only child, you still want to get that sort of parental approval. Yeah,
it would be a big part of it. But you're getting the same reinforcing signals all the time as you're growing up in Limerick, because, I grew up, my dad is into the sport. So my dad is president of Presentation RFC, a junior club in Limerick. Himself and all his mates who played with them years ago, they all have kids, so they bring their kids out to play underage with them. Then I go to St. Munchin's College, and rugby is number one sport there, and I see then how rugby is how important the junior cup and the senior cup is, and I suddenly go, my eyes get open to this again.
Yeah.
This is another level. And then I see guys who played in St. Munchin's going on, like Anthony Foley. I see him going on to play for Shannon, and I see when all the crowds were at the AAL games and seeing that, and then I see him going on to play for Munster. So the pathway was kind of laid out for me, you know. So it was at every step. This was like, you wanted to be one of those guys. When I used to go down to Kilkee when I was a kid, and you'd be like 14 and you'd be trying to buy cans and go down drinking them, and you'd see all of the Thomond lads drinking in the Thomond pub. You'd see the Young Munsters lads, you know, drinking outside the Young Munsters pub. You'd see the Shannon lads, and the next day you'd see them out for a run, and all. It was like different tribes, you know. And then to see them all trying to come together for Munster, and I used to look up to those guys, and you know, I would always be picking the best AIL team I'd ever seen, and all that, like so.
So you were noticing everything, and you were setting standards and setting objectives against what you were seeing everywhere you looked.
Not as articulately as you put it, but yeah.
And was it something that yourself and your dad kind of had together? Because I was reading about Owen Morgan. I was reading an interview with his father after they won the World Cup, and you know, he said when he saw Owen Morgan on the pitch at Lord's after the game, Owen Morgan hugged him, and it was very moving. He said, and he just hugged him and said, "We did it, we did it." And it's that moment of kind of, you know, there's a line between whatever they were doing as kind of, you know, father and son as 10, and you know, and people lose sight of that. But for him, it's a very clear line between whatever his father did for him as a kid and him standing on the pitch at Lord's as a World Cup winner. Like, would you have had that kind of bond?
I have a good relationship with my parents and with my dad, but I never felt like my dad was trying to direct me towards success in rugby. He just, you know, I'd say probably that the pub trade is a hard gig, and my dad I would have grown up with him working 80, 100 hours in the bar, and I'd say he was probably going like, when is this young fella going to grow up to take over from me, to give me a break? Yeah. And because my dad, like, it's probably different now for parents who grew up and know what professional rugby entails, but rugby was only professional in 95. So my dad, I'd say my dad would be like, I need you to come in and help me move kegs on Tuesday morning during the summer, and I'd be like, no, I'm going down to the Shannon gym, I'm going to lift weights down there. And then I come back, and then my outfit at the autumn would say like, I don't know what you're doing in the morning, you know, when you're off training. And I'd be like, well, I'm training, man. I'm trying to become a really good rugby player. And so I suppose it was probably a little bit alien for my dad, you know, and it probably just happened that as it all unfolded, rugby goes professional 95. It's probably not really professional until probably 2002, 2003, you know, in terms of the approach, which isn't a bad uptake. And then a lot of the lads like the Peter Stringers and Brian O'Driscoll's and Ron Nagara start coming through, and they know nothing but professional life, whereas a lot of the other players would have been amateurs who then suddenly became professional. And that's probably how it unfolded.
But you've said it a couple of times here, this, like, you weren't, you know, you didn't have a lot of talent, and, you know, it's something that I like, it seems to have driven you, this idea that, like, you said before, I always almost that I have an inferiority complex that drives me. So wherever you looked, were you seeing people who you felt were more talented than you, and that you had to compete with them through hard work?
Yeah, that would be very much it. I always felt like some of the kids who were coming down from Dublin had been exposed to better coaching, had, you know, that they had a natural advantage, and I thought, you know, for a long time I think it was just me, but then I'd speak to my teammates, I'd speak to Donnacha O'Callaghan, and he would have the same thing, and Paul O'Connell, and, you know, I'm referencing this group, but that's the group that I know. And we would always have felt that we had to be the hardest working guys, because there was guys there who were naturally a lot more talented than us. And I'm not trying to be I'm not trying to show a massive level of humility by saying I'm not that talented, because there's lots of guys who can be some of the best players in the world who probably aren't naturally very talented, but they're really, really driven. But that's just the reality. That's what I like about rugby. Yeah. In that, if I wasn't a very good football player or a hurler, they're specialised skill-based sports, I wouldn't really have much of a chance, you know.
Yeah.
I was able to go, okay, well, I want to get really good at a couple of aspects of the game. If I can become really good at line-out throwing, if I can get really fit, you know, if I can become a good tackler, if I can have reasonable handling skills, then I can get somewhere in this game, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas if it was something and I know there's other aspects to those skill-based sports, but if it was hurling, I can't just pick up a hurl at 18 and expect to go and play for Limerick. I'm not going to, because it starts so much earlier, and
Right.
that's what I liked about rugby. And I think I was able to take those things, some of those tools like that work ethic, and apply it to other things. It gave me good confidence then going forward.
So when Paul O'Connell says, you know, what Flannery had came from a self-belief I'd never seen before and haven't seen since, is that accurate? Like, was it a self-belief, or was it almost the opposite?
When you say what, like the opposite of self-belief is self-doubt?
Yeah.
I think it's just being probably determined or dogged and saying, well, I always felt like I would get there. I didn't know how long it would take me to get there, but I knew I'd get there. And to be honest, seeing guys that I knew achieve what I wanted to achieve before me, it kind of reinforced that this is actually a blueprint that will work.
Yeah.
You know, when I saw a lot of the guys that I played underage with, like Donica and Paul and Stringer and all those lads, when I saw them go on to play, and I went, if I stick with this, I'll get there eventually. And sometimes you just have to believe that it's going to happen and just keep working on it every single day.
And did you notice like your obsessiveness or your drive? Because like I heard you tell a story about like when you were in school, and you know there's a guy in your team who broke his arm.
Fractured his wrist. Which isn't a broken arm. It's very different.
Okay, so you're still disputing the seriousness of his injury, but 20 years later, over 20 years later. And what did you like? Tell me that story.
It was because St. Munchin's is the school, the secondary school I went to is a 5-year cycle.
Right.
So you generally end up, you play, and this, when I played, senior rugby was under 18s. So you would play against guys a year older than you, which gives them a massive physical advantage. So I played, and then I thought we didn't win the senior cup, and I was pretty gutted. And I'd done an okay leaving cert, and I said I was going to repeat because I wanted to come back. I felt we had a really good team the following year. So I repeated my leaving cert with a view to just playing rugby. And I also, I put a bit of thought in. I said, well, if I go back and play, I'll get to play another year at school standard, and I'll be a better chance of getting picked up, you know, the following year, maybe into a national academy or something like that. There wasn't provincial academies at the time. So I went back and I repeated for the year just to play rugby, really. And I was really, really obsessed with rugby that year, and I trained a lot. I probably didn't study as much as I could because I kind of had an okay leaving cert from the previous year, which I was able to use. And it was weird because schools rugby could be just 3 games, really, you know, the quarterfinal, the semi-final, and the final. When I played in the senior cup, so it's 3 games. You're spending a whole year of your life to go back. But there was the other stuff as well. Like I would get a chance to play for the Munster schools and play for the Irish schools and become a better player. But when it came down to senior cup, you know, having your best players available, it gives you the best chance of winning. And one of the players that we had, Frankie Roach, he was he was a quality player. You know, he was like, I used to get so excited when suddenly you come in the start of a school year and there'd be some new kids in the school. And particularly when they're good at sport, I'd be like, this guy's great, you know. And he was quick, he had good hands, he could play as a prop, he could play in the centre, and he fractured his wrist. And it was like, he's out for the senior cup, and I felt like we just can't afford to have this guy not on the team. And when I spoke to him, he said, listen, he said, my wrist is fractured, and it was in a cast. And he said, I've got the Irish 19s, the representative team they were going to be playing in April or something like that. So he said, like, I'm going to just leave the cast on till April, and then I'm going to go for those trials. And the cynical part of me said, he's just boxing clever here, where he could play, he could risk. There's a risk of injury, but there's always a risk of injury. Yeah. He could play in the senior cup for us and then go for the trials. And he was pretty adamant now that my wrist is not good enough.
So you were saying this to him. You were telling him this, were you?
Probably not articulating as clearly as I am here to you, but I just said, listen, I reckon you can play, and he was like, I don't think I can. So I was, because I'd repeated, I had a little bit of leeway. My parents, I was able to take my mum's car, and I drove to school one day, and during Bizorg, I think I had a little penknife or something like that with me, and I sat beside him and we cut his cast off.
And did he know you were cutting his cast off, or did you look for his agreement?
He knew as I was cutting it.
Suddenly,
it wasn't like I cut it off and he didn't. Where's my cast?
But like you didn't know before you started cutting it off that you were going to cut it off.
I think a part of me wants to believe that he thinks, well, if it's okay, I will play.
Right.
You know, because he's a strong guy. Like if he didn't want me to cut the cast off, he could have stopped me. And we cut the cast off, and I think I said, come on, we'll go to the hospital. And I drove him out at lunch. We went out to the regional hospital. And I know now, retelling this story, that this is weird. But at the time, it seemed so normal. It seemed like the only process that I could do to get him to play.
Yeah.
And drove him out and went into A&E, and we waited. And then he got an X-ray, and the doctor came out and said, yeah, this guy's wrist is fractured. And if he falls, he's going to break it again. And I was like... So I was like, all right, okay. Yeah.
And you accepted that? You had to accept it?
I just left it at that then, you know.
And who put the cast back on?
I don't really know what happened from there. But
he was no good to you.
Yeah.
Did you even bring him back from the hospital?
He won he went to the under-19s in April, and he won the World Cup.
Right.
Which was pretty phenomenal.
Wow.
So
he was right.
He was right in terms of, well, I think he would have played if he was okay. But we were just trying to figure it out.
And did anyone say to you at that point, like, Jesus, Jerry, that's you've kind of gone to extreme lengths there?
No, that's the thing, is that what's so great about schools rugby is that it's so pure. There's nothing else. I remember one of my teachers saying to me, Sean Keneally saying to me years ago, he said, like, when we were sitting there before a game, he gave us a speech. He said, "You'll never experience playing a team sport like this again, because when you come out of school, people will have college, or else they'll have girlfriends, serious girlfriends, or else they'll have jobs, and as they get older, they have kids.
Yeah.
So, you know, everyone's got a different motivation going on. But he said, when you're here in school, you just want to play as hard as you can and win the cup. Yeah. He said, this is as close to pure as you'll get." And I was lucky then that I went into professional rugby, which is pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
People have girlfriends and they have jobs, but that is their sole focus is rugby. That's because that's how they earn their living. And that's what I loved about schools rugby. Is everything was just to play for the team, and that was. I remember I'd lie in bed at night staring at the ceiling, thinking about games and who we were going to play. Right. I was so obsessed with it, like.
And talk to me then about when you, like, becoming a professional, because, like, by the time you established yourself at Munster, you were 25, 26. So you had a period of Connacht and then a couple of years at Munster where you were, like, weren't in the team, weren't always on the bench. Like, those years, like that sense that you had that you were going to make it, like, how much was that challenge during those years?
Yeah, it was massively challenging, particularly when I came. There's a couple of, I was calling like that Eminem moment, you know, when he's getting ready to freestyle and he's choked in the past. I had a couple of those in my in my career. I remember one of them was, I suppose the difference is players probably came through a little bit later when I played, because they weren't as physically prepared or as you know, mentally, or their skill level wouldn't have been as developed as it is now, because the standard of coaching and the standard of conditioning and training for the players when they're in school is so much higher. So players are closer to playing when they come straight out of school. Yeah. I came out of school and I played in college for a couple of years, and I had an offer. I got on the National Academy, which is like a 3-year contract. I had a lot of injuries during it, so I was probably pretty far down the pecking order in terms of making it. So I had to kind of forge a bit of a circuitous route in terms of going up to Connacht to get game time there. And I grew up a lot up there. I really enjoyed my time playing with Galwegians, getting brought into the Connacht squad, getting a full-time offer of a contract with Connacht, playing with Connacht, you know, feeling like I was probably maybe third choice, and then how am I going to get the first choice here? And then one or two injuries, and I got a big break against Leinster. I played Connacht hadn't beaten Leinster in 500 years or something like that over in Leinster, and we beat them, and then I kind of took off from there, and then coming back down to Munster, and I just thought, well, I've cracked it now because Munster have offered me a contract. I think I got offered a contract by Leinster as well and a couple of clubs in England, but once Munster said it to me, like I think I took probably a 20% pay cut to go to Munster, and I went down to Munster, and I thought, no, it's just going to happen for me now. But I didn't realise the quality of players that were there was so much higher, and they didn't rotate the squad as much back then. It would be more like the internationals would be gone on block, and then they'd play, say, the second tier players, which I would have been one of, and we generally weren't ready. You had a lot of really good young players, and then you had some journeyman pros who were there who were probably just earning a living without really making the place better. And I suppose this is my looking back on it now. I felt the coaches kind of went like, some of these kids aren't just not good enough. Then the internationals would come back, and it would be like the show's back on the road again. We're winning, so it was hard to get in. And eventually, so that's I thought that it would just kick off for me when I went back to Munster. It didn't happen, and I have to look at my own game and say, well, was I good enough to start? Maybe I wasn't, you know.
But like when you talk about, you know, schools rugby and that being the pure thing, and professional rugby allowing you to kind of have that to a certain degree as well. But like when you're encountering there, you're talking about journeyman pros, you're talking about going to Connacht and trying, you know, getting an offer of a full-time contract. Like there are certain kind of life realities there as well that are like sort of impinging on whatever kind of romantic notion you have about sport, aren't there? You're dealing with pros who are trying to pay a mortgage, who are trying to keep, you know, support their family. Like, how much of an awakening was that kind of aspect of sort of professional sport to you?
I suppose it was there. I was really lucky in that the guys who were really driving the bus in Munster were the guys who'd come through and had fully embraced professionalism, the likes of Stringer and O'Gara, and then they had experienced pros like Langford who was in there, and these were guys who were fully professional and they knew what it was. And like I was no fool either. Like when we do fitness, and I'd see some of those journeyman guys not hitting the line or cutting corners, and I'd see them what they're eating. I knew that was wrong, and I knew that's why they were where they were. And then subsequently, when I see the guys that are being good pros, when I see them going on and playing for Ireland and being successful, I go, well, this is the way.
Yeah.
And I understand what you're saying about there's, you know, the romantic notion like that goes out the window a little bit, but it is still the main thing for you. Like your drive for rugby is not. There's other things in your life, but there's nothing there that's really stepping across your drive to try and get on the team, be the best player you can be. Yeah.
And nothing like Paul O'Connell said, you saw it as a victory if he ate some crisps on his plate and you left yours alone. Like, was that how intense you were at times?
No, I think he makes a big deal of some of that stuff, man. He's just there was a really good kind of internal peer pressure within the group because we knew each other so well, and because we were all, none of us felt like it came easy, so we all knew how hard you had to work. We drove each other, and like I would see, you know, one of the lads, Marcus Horn, might have done some sort of fitness session, and then we'd be like, oh, I need to get one of those in, and then you'd go out to do it, and then Donnacha Callahan would have done two of them, Mick O'Driscoll would have done one, or Dennis Leamy. So everyone was competing within themselves, and we kind of tried to hold each other accountable quite a lot, which is, I don't know for sure if it was if that level was there. I'm pretty sure it was but when you're a coach, you don't know. I don't know if it was there. I'm pretty sure that's still, the top teams still have that, you know, that they have a couple of standard setters within the group, and that they all just try and push it on. Because if you're depending on the coach to try and hold people accountable, the coach can't see you 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
The coach only sees you when you're at work. But it's all the stuff that you do outside of it that can really have a massive effect on your performance. And I think that the guys that I played with at Munster, we hung around together, you know, and we looked after each other. And, you know, a lot of times someone might pull me up and say, listen, you know, you can do this better, you know, your timekeeping is poor, you know, I mean, you need to get to the sessions earlier and get a little bit more work in before, and they did it from a place of caring for you rather than just giving out to you, you know.
But is that something that, and we're going to get onto Arsenal in a bit, but like when you talk about the culture of rugby and stuff like that, is that something that's very pronounced in a sport like that, do you think, compared to something like football where kids get money kind of easily, where maybe they are more reliant on talent, although there's obviously a lot of hard work for most of them as well?
When I contrast, and I'm conscious that, like, I spent 1 year in football, and I spent a year with Arsenal when they were probably, football was in a transitional stage where suddenly the FA have decided that if you want to get your funding in the Premier League, you need to have X amount of S&C coaches, you need to have a head of sports science, you need to have a head of, you know, a long-term athletic development pathway put in place to develop all your young players. So I came into it, and there was a lot of guys who were just used to just playing football all the time, and they were probably 16, 17, 18 years of age, and suddenly they have this old retired rugby player trying to say to them, this is the extra work you got to do as well, and they're like, what's this about, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas nowadays, when the kids come in, it's football was probably where rugby was in 2003 when I went over there in 2013 or 14, you know, that's probably where it was. Suddenly now the kids that come through the Arsenal Academy, when I speak to the lads, all they know is they have to do their prehab, they have to do their rehab. 100% the sport is the main thing. The skill element is the biggest part. For me, I found it hard. I found the culture a lot different to rugby. And there's lots of reasons for that as well, you know.
Talk to me a little bit about that, because when you retired, you were like, what was your plan when you initially retired? Like, you were going, like, you talked there about your dad working 80, 100 hours a week and like thinking you're going to, you know, when's he going to help me out here? When you retired, that was what you were going to do, wasn't it? Like you put money into you revamped the pub and all that kind of stuff, and then Arsenal came along. Was that correct reading?
No,
of it?
I think like my parents were separating when I was probably, I remember, I think it was in around when I was 24 or something. They were formally separating, and my dad had said to me, have you any interest in the bar? Because otherwise we're going to sell it and you know, and split the money. And like you said, I wasn't on the Munster team at the time. I wasn't playing. I didn't have any kind of a profile. Not that it matters a lot, but maybe if you're opening a business, it does help. And I just grew up with my dad. I was still trying to get to where I wanted to get in rugby. So my experience with the bar was that it's unforgiving with the hours. And I said to my dad, I can't do it, you know, because I have to give up on the rugby side then. And I've a lot of my uncles are involved in the bar trade as well. So they said, listen, we think this is worthwhile. And my uncle Phil in particular was really supportive and came on board and said, listen, you should do this thing. And I said, okay. And when I did the maths on it, like, you sell the bar, you pay the capital gains tax, and then you split the money. I said, well, what are my parents going to do with that money? You know, they're going to look for something else to put it into. Whereas if I can get stuck into the pub now, and that's what I did. I borrowed some money, put it into it, and you know, we ended up winning the European Cup that year with Munster. When I opened it, so I got a great start.
Right,
If you can't make it work, then you might as well give up. And then over the years while I was playing, from say 25 to 33 when I retired, probably when I was, I think it was after the Lions tour in 09, we expanded the pub again, and I got a fantastic manager, Will Morgan, who's just like just opened my eyes to what the trade should be. And so when I retired, I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I had options.
Right.
And I knew that I couldn't go back in and run the bar as well as Will could. So I said, well, what will I do? And I had, unfortunately, a lot of lads that I had played with, they all ended up retiring at the same time. So I saw guys retiring before me. I saw some of the mistakes they made. I saw guys get big operations. I saw guys jump into jobs that they weren't ready for, that they weren't passionate about, just to be doing something. And I saw guys then who just stopped playing and then didn't really have any structure in their lives. So I was, luckily for me, I was able to go, okay, well, I can see I the last 18 months of my career I was just injured non-stop. I could not get my calf right, and I was miserable, really, really miserable. So when I eventually had to retire, I had already put things in place. I had lined up to do a master's in sports performance in the university, because I tried to think of all the things. I said, I've got to have structure. It's, structure, and I want to, because most people retire and they spend a year of their life faffing around, not really doing anything. I said, even if I don't do anything, at least that year after I retire, I'll have upskilled and something might come of it. And I remember speaking to one of the lads after Munster played Northampton in the European Cup, and I had told the group that I was going to retire, and it was pretty hard for me to go over and see them all and sing Stand Up and Fight after the game. Simon Zebo scored a hat-trick. He was incredible against Northampton, and that was tough for me. And the players came back and they were all having a big night out the following night. They were going to have, I think they had a break for a week before the Six Nations, so they said, they were texting me saying, are you coming in for a few points? And I didn't want to seem like, because I wasn't part of it, that I wasn't going to come in with them. But I also knew that I had my own thing, and I was starting college on the Monday. And I said, listen, I said, I've got college on Monday now. And I said, that's my thing. So I was studying on the Sunday when I got back. And then I went in to have 2 pints with them, just to show my face and be sociable. And when I got in there, they were pretty well oiled. And I remember speaking to some of the lads, speaking to Paul, and he just said to me, he had a few, and he was looking out, and he was looking at the pub and seeing how buzzed up everyone was. And he was like, look at this. This is what's so great about Munster. Like, when you win, you have all these people, you've made all these people so happy. You're serving something bigger than yourself. And he said, you don't need to go away and reinvent the wheel. You don't need to become a rocket scientist. He was almost trying to say to me, why are you going off to college?
Right.
And I felt like that I didn't have a right to come back into Munster until I'd gone away to try and prove myself at something else. And I remember having a conversation when I went home, and I thought about it for a while. And I think I might have wrote him a long text then, just saying, listen, I said, I still love Munster. I'd love to come back there, and if it's right for me, and if it's right for Munster, more importantly, I will come back. And I went off and I studied for the year, and then I spent that year in Arsenal, and I just ended up coming back into Munster then. It was so much sooner than I thought, but that's probably where I was in how it happened, When I retired, I didn't have a strict plan. I just said study, and then things will happen from there.
And was your parents' separation a shock?
No, I think it was. I probably would have seen it. It was on the cards for a few years, so it wasn't a shock. No.
And was it something that, again, as an only child, was it something you felt there was more pressure on you to deal with?
Yeah, I think because, again, like, I don't have something else to compare it to, but I think that.
But did you ever think, I wish I had someone to share this with or talk to?
Yeah, you definitely would have preferred to have someone else there, as a kind of, it's not just all on me. The same as, like, I suppose now, if anything happens with my parents, it's I know that's on me. That's my responsibility, which is, I suppose if I have a brother, I wouldn't be going, you deal with that shit there.
Or they might not be dealing, they might be pissing you off the way they deal with it anyway. So
yeah. So I don't have a point of reference from somewhere else. I just.
But did you feel it as a burden then?
Look, you look at it's not really a burden, because, like I said to you, when I was young, they facilitated me and whatever like you said, I was selfish, my own selfish pursuits.
You're not going to let that go.
And there's always a plus and a minus. And I don't know if it's that much of a minus, I suppose I don't know how good a son I've been to them. I've tried to be the best I can, but.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think I'm doing a pretty good job.
Yeah. But talk to me a bit about family then, because, like, you've 2 kids now, and I wonder how much that informs what you do. And like, I've talked to you about that. What we've had conversations about family and stuff, and it seems to be something that is like central to everything you do, really.
Yeah, well, I think I probably, this ties back in, I suppose, to your last point, in that, like, from growing up with no brothers and sisters, and to be fair, my father had like 7 brothers and 2 sisters, or 6 brothers and 2 sisters, and you know the Flannerys are a really big family and they're great. But I always felt like I was, you know, my own little gang here is actually pretty small. It's just me. So I like the idea of a bigger family. We've two boys at the moment, and you know, I'd love to have more kids, but I think it's something that I think gives you a real a foundation that you can go out when you know you can come back to that.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it gives you a chance to go out, and it gives you a little bit of perspective on things. You can go out and say, oh, I really want to achieve this thing, and it gives you a reason to get up in the morning and do things as well. Because after a while, if you get after a while, like, just going out to work to get money to buy a new iPhone or to buy a new T-shirt, it's kind of pointless, isn't it?
So do you think it actually, people say it puts things in perspective, but do you think it kind of actually more it focuses you more in some ways?
Yeah, definitely focus. You hear everyone say it puts things in perspective. Everyone still gets stressed about work. You know what I mean? It definitely gives you, it just, I suppose it's like, it's all like the stages of life. It's something else that comes up, and it's a really enjoyable, like, before I had kids, like, I'd earn money to buy, to go on nice holidays or to do things like that, like, and after a while it just feels a little bit selfish. You know, you start getting a bit bored of it. I've been to New York 20 times, I've done this, you know, and the magic of doing things for the first time is it's not gone, but it's harder to chase. But then it's like, I was trying to describe to one of my friends, when you start, for me, when I first had kids, it's like everything in your life becomes so much shitter that small things then become unbelievable, because you can't go out, because you can't do anything, because you're always tired. That if you actually go out and just go out and have a nice lunch, it's like, oh my God, I was out and I had lunch, it was so amazing. You're so much more appreciative of it. And that's probably a stage. And then as the kids get a little bit older, it's just like this more and more layers that keep opening to become their own little people.
Well, like you said to me, we had a conversation a few weeks ago, and you were saying about a weekend you had, you know, when they were all away, and just trying to kind of, you know, find, you know, just being at a sort of almost one. I've had that when my wife and son go away, and you're like, you're looking forward to, you think this is going to be great. And then after about 2 or 3 hours, you're like, where is everybody?
It was, my partner was going over to England, and she said, I said, you should bring the kids, because I was starting up here with Joe, and I didn't want to be trying to go up to Dublin and then try and get back to get the kids back out of creche. And so she took the kids with her, and I said, oh, that's great, now take that stress away. And she went out Friday night, and they went out so late Friday night, you know, they flew out late enough Friday night. But then Saturday I was like, oh, this is what it must feel like to be divorced. There's nobody here in the house. It's pretty quiet. And then when your other mates have kids as well, you kind of feel like, oh, I'll call over to him, but then I'll just be sitting around his house while he's just gonna, you know. So it kind of made me just think, like, sometimes it's good to know what the worst case scenario is when you're fighting with your missus. Don't fight too much. Don't think it's important enough to win this argument, because when there's no one in the house, it's pretty boring.
You're like Alan Partridge asking, you know, this guy in the service station if they fancied a pint. Like,
It was, I was pretty much. It was a lonely enough couple of days, and then they come back, and then after like 3 hours of them going insane, you're like, oh God, I could do with a break. But then the alternative is never as good as having them there.
I know. So talk, like, when you came back from Arsenal, like, so you went to Arsenal for a year, and then you came back to Munster. Talk to me about the approach you brought to that, because somebody told me that the interview you did for Munster's coaching job was like one of the most impressive that anybody had ever seen. Like, that was what somebody told me about that. Like, what was your preparation for taking that role?
Coming back into Munster?
Yeah.
Well, when I was over in England, like Saracens, their training ground is quite close to Arsenal's. So I would pop down there. I would meet Mark McCall and Phil Morrow, and I would just try and keep my eye in rugby. I was doing a little bit of stuff on some punditry when I'd fly home the odd time, and it was in the latter half of the season, and I remember I just got a phone call from Anthony Foley. I went down to Harlequins a couple of times. I knew some of the London Irish lads, and rugby wasn't really on my radar because I didn't see how I was going to get back in. And then Anthony Foley rang me, and he just said, "Listen," he said, "I'm putting together my coaching ticket for next season. I'm going to be the head coach." He said, "Would you like to come back and maybe have a look at the scrum?" And it was literally like, it was just a call out of the blue. I remember going, "Oh, wow, where am I going to go with this?" And my initial reaction is, I'm not ready for this. And then I went down, I spoke to Phil Morrow down in Saracens, and he said to me, "Listen, it's so hard to get into professional rugby, and for you particularly to get a chance to go back to Munster. He said, you should take this." And I suppose I said, "Yeah, okay." And I just tried to spend as much time as I could preparing. I didn't mean I had the job. I had to interview with the professional game board, and I tried to learn as much as I could about it. And you know, it was almost like I'd played there. I'd played in the position, and what I was very conscious of was I wouldn't come back to Munster if I felt I was going to hinder it. You know, if I felt my inexperience was going to hinder Munster, and I felt that the remit around coaching the scrum was narrow enough that I could get up to speed fast enough, even with my lack of experience, that I wouldn't hold the team back. So I put together a presentation, and I put it together, and I might have seemed like I knew exactly what I was talking about, but I was pretty nervous doing it. And then coming back into coaching Munster I was really, really nervous coming back in, because I was coaching guys that I played with. Yeah. And like I said to you, there's some people that when you see them as a playing, you go, I think he'd make a good coach. I never felt I was ever one of those guys. So
did you not?
No, I always felt like I was kind of a little bit too much one of the lads.
But you were kind of a messer, like, were you? Or like Ferris described you as a madman at the best of times.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was insane. I'd just say I was just one of the lads, you know. Like you knew that Ron O'Gara would make a good coach. You could tell that Paul O'Connell would make a good coach. And I know that Brian O'Driscoll, if he put his hand to it, would make a really good coach. It was never something that I felt, oh, this guy, I've got an aptitude for it.
But I've sat in a room with you talking about rugby and explaining rugby things to me, and I don't know anything about rugby, and it's infectious. And we had a conversation a few weeks ago where you did that, and it reminded me of a conversation I had with John Giles once about football, where he's explaining certain aspects of football. And if you're kind of at that level of, you know, to me that's sort of the gold standard. Like he made everything so clear when he talked about football. So presumably you had that when you talked about rugby, when you were a player, you were able to communicate it in that way as well.
Yeah, I think the areas that I was responsible for when I played, I knew I was good. I was really strong in them, but I was almost probably like I would focus on what was relative to my position. I would know that stuff inside out, but my broader knowledge of the game wasn't so strong. So but again, like I said to you, that my remit was quite narrow when I came into Munster. It was around the scrum. But the biggest problem for me was just not trusting myself coming into the job, in that, like, I didn't feel like, oh, well, I can be a coach now. I felt like, because I felt like that's not my personality, so I tried to be someone different. And I remember the first day when I went in and met the lads in pre-season, I remember I walked in and I did a presentation to them, and I stood up at the where you speak, like the kind of, whatever you call it, podium, whatever, when I was presenting to the group. And the first thing I did was introduce myself. I said, "Well, lads, my name's Jerry Flannery." And then as I walked across the room, I said, in my head, I was like, I can't believe I just introduced myself to them. And I could see the lads looking at me going, what is this guy introducing him? We all know who he is, man. We played with him like a few years ago. And it was because I was so insecure about how I would come across to them that I felt I had to be someone different.
But would it not have been the opposite too? If you hadn't introduced yourself, people would be saying like, Jesus, he thinks he's just kind of riding on his own reputation rather as a player.
I wasn't. There was. I don't think by introducing myself that I gained anything in terms of reputation. It was just what I'm just trying to say is.
But you're trying to be someone else.
Yeah, I wasn't being myself, and that was the case. I felt like it was like imposter syndrome. How have I ended up here being a coach?
Right.
And it's definitely like I was afraid to say I didn't have answers for things because I felt like I'm the coach. I need to have answers.
Okay.
And my idea of what coaching was so far removed from what it should be. It was about me trying to tell them what they should do and me trying to say, rather than just me tapping into the knowledge that's in the group and helping them and, coming up, with plans together. And it was so exhausting for me to go in there every single day. And we probably had quite an inexperienced coaching group at the time because the head coach, it was his first time as a head coach. All of the other assistant coaches, it was their first time as professional assistant coaches. So I didn't, I felt like I couldn't assist the head coach. I couldn't assist Axel enough because I didn't have the knowledge. I was learning on the job, but we were all learning on the job, unfortunately, at the time. So we were all quite prescriptive in how we coach. We'd said, this is what we're going to do. And the player said, what should we do here? So, and before we'd even given it a thought, I'd be like, this is what you should do there.
Right. Because that makes it harder then, presumably, when you realise you've done the wrong thing, you 100%. Can't change your mind.
Well, there's no player. The players are the most important guys there. And it's the player ownership is what really drives a team, is when the players feel like this is our plan and we've bought into this and we believe in it, because it worked for a while. But the minute when you're prescriptive as a coach, right from the start and all the way through, it works until it doesn't. Because the minute it doesn't work, the players just turn around and look at you and say, the plan's not working. It's your plan.
Yeah.
As opposed to when you work with them and they're on board, it's such a more enjoyable environment as well. And I suppose and I've thought about this, and when I've spoken to people about it, I said, well, what would you do differently? Would you have gone up there on the first day and said, lads, I'm not really sure what I'm doing, work with me? And I said, I can't do that either.
Yeah.
You can't go up and pretend that you know everything, and you can't go up, because these guys are all incredibly driven, so ambitious. They're on short-term contracts. They don't know how long they're going to be in Munster. So they're not going, well, I've got a 7-year contract, Flash, so, I'll give you a year and then we'll see how you get up to speed. They want to win now.
Yeah.
And if they don't feel that you're going to help them, they want you gone. So I couldn't go up and say, listen, I'm not really sure what I'm doing, but work with me. And
you couldn't be David Moyes, like you could.
But what I felt would have been subsequently, what I think is to tap into the knowledge there and say, listen, I don't have all the answers, but I know you lads, I know in the room that we will come up with the answers, and work with them and say, and you buy yourself time when you're in a new role. And then it allows you to get people on board with you and assist you, and then you start developing your own ideas, and everyone works as a group together. Now, obviously, there's going to be times if you're working with guys who aren't working hard or who are inept, then it's a different case. But with the group that I had at Munster, I should have tapped into that more from the start, and I tried to be kind of like as if I knew everything, and I worked insanely hard without ever moving the needle in performance. Like, I worked so much on stuff that just didn't matter, just so I could feel like I was trying to help.
Right.
And I look back at it, I have journals of notes that are just ridiculous. They're, what did I even do them for? And when I speak to Paul O'Connell about it, and he's coaching now, he goes, sometimes you need to go through that. You need to do that amount of work to realize that stuff is irrelevant, and this is what these are the big things that you must focus on. But it was exhausting for me the first 2 years.
And you must have known as well, like you're trying to portray yourself as something that you're not.
Yeah, well, I think the guys that knew me were trying to help me.
Yeah.
They were trying to work with me, and I'd say, let's do this, and they'd jump in and help straight away. The guys who didn't probably know me personally but knew of me were probably wondering, saying, I had a different idea what this guy's like. Probably a bit of a dickhead, you know what I mean? Probably what they thought.
Yeah.
And I can't blame them, but.
And how much was that a part a part of that, just that sense of, you feeling like you were one of the lads? I think this is kind of common among certain players, when players transition into management, that if you have been one of the lads and kind of a messer or whatever, sometimes you can have a reaction to that and you lose an awful lot of that, because you very consciously cut that sort of aspect of your personality out from every kind of aspect of your sort of public persona at that stage, didn't you?
Yeah. Because I didn't know what the best thing I've realized now is to just be yourself.
Yeah.
Is to just be yourself, and then people will accept it. And all of the things that I would have based how I wanted to act and behave as a player, and when I was working outside of rugby in either in Maximum Media here or with the bars, I just want to work hard and be honest and try and get a little bit better all the time. And I went away from those things when I didn't go away from them, but they're the things that should give me the confidence to be myself when I went in coaching. But I kind of felt like I just needed to be a different person, which is so tiring. So I come home exhausted at the end of the day, from being somebody different. But with time, I started to say, well, I can actually be myself here, and I really started to love it then, you know.
Would you say you've changed much? Like, you know, you talk about family, but you talk about how it kind of gives you an extra drive in certain ways. Would you say you've changed much as a person, like fundamentally, from the guy who felt he had to work so hard to get everything that everyone else around them had more talent, and you needed that drive if you were to get ahead? Like, do you ever feel complacent?
No, I never feel complacent. I definitely have changed, and I think most people kind of grow up and they probably become maybe a little bit more mellow. I still have that kind of feel of like, it feels weird for me now, out of the routine of rugby up. You know, I'm still trying to get routine in, but like I'm traveling to Dublin more to come up to work here now, and it just feels like to travel up for 2 hours, I feel like I should be unbelievably productive up here, and then we have meetings and we do things, and I'm like, is that it? Is that it? Like, I feel for the amount of time I invested to get up there, it feels like there should be more. But I remember that's what it was like before when I used to work here, and that's probably the normal working day outside of professional sport when you're trying to cover so much stuff. But where I definitely feel I've grown and coaching has helped me is when you're a player, it's all about you. You know what I mean? And even when I retired, then I still had that mentality. It's not that I'm like, I know you called me selfish at the start, but you probably are a little bit selfish. And when I was learning to interact with the players, you know, we did personality profiling, and they do different energies and what kind of energy are you? And, you know, it sounds a bit airy-fairy, but it actually can be really helpful when you're trying to communicate with people. So there was like, I rated quite low on green energy, which is like empathy, and, you know, and I was kind of higher on red, which is, you know, it can be kind of like, you know, we're going to do this and we're going to get it done. And then when you get stressed, you become stubborn and you become narrow focus, and you can't see threats and things coming. And I used to go like, well, why would anyone ever, like, what good is green energy to you? Right. And they'd say, well, think of coaches that you felt never cared about you. And I was like, oh, okay, I got it. Yeah. So then they said, when you're communicating with this guy, you need to he needs to feel that you care about him. So then I would have something in my head, and I go, right, I've got to go over and chat to this player now about this. But I'd be like, in my head, I want to talk to him about something that happened in the game, say a missed tackle, or I want to talk about something he did like that I felt maybe was at odds with what we'd agreed during the week or what we'd planned. But when I go over to him, all I want to do is talk about that. But then I realize this guy's green. So I start going, oh, how are you today? And he goes, good. And I'm just thinking the missed tackle. And he's there. So, what you get up to for the weekend? He's like, yeah, good. Took the dog for a walk yesterday. I'm like, oh, how is your dog? And all the time I'm like this, oh my God, this is draining me. It's draining me. But it was, you know, it was a process that I had to go through. And then eventually said, listen, when we sit down, we watch some of the footage from the game at the weekend. And he's like, yeah, come on. I was like, okay. But that became easier for me over time, right, you know, and I started to realize, okay, well, this is me understanding that it's not just about how I interact with people. It's not just about, you know, what I'm like. You gotta be able to accommodate other people.
But I'm not trying to, you know, row back from calling you selfish, but like you always struck me as somebody who has a bit of kind of, you know, your green, you know, bar would be quite high. Like, you remember you telling me that you've said to some of the players at Munster, like, you know, you'd babysit their kids for them if they wanted to get out, you know. So like you are aware of what people are doing, if they're, especially if they're somewhere like far away from home and they don't have people who can help them in those situations. So you've got a degree of empathy.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say, is that it has evolved.
Yeah.
The green bar has gone from
But,
0 to
yeah.
maybe 4%.
I know, but that's kind of good. But you know, you're getting that natural, like rather than just even like just having to go to like, how was your weekend? Like that's 1%.
Yeah. Well, that's where I was at the start. It was that hard for me. But I think that there's a general, and it's. I think the thing is, if you can be the same person at home with your partner and your kids as you can be at work, you know, it's so much easier to just be yourself all the time, and it takes a certain amount of, you need to feel that you're, I suppose it takes a certain amount of self-confidence as well, and probably I didn't have that when I went into the job at Munster, and after a while I realised that I can be okay at this job, I can be pretty good at it, and it's that's probably where it came from.
Well, Jerry, I'm looking forward to, you know, chats about how the weekend was when we see you up here more often. It's been great having you on today.
Thanks very much. Enjoyed it.
It's really great talking to Jerry today, and it's going to be fantastic having him on the House of Rugby all through the season. Before we go, don't forget to subscribe to Ireland Unfiltered on all the usual channels, and if you like the show, please leave a review.